Does lightning strike twice? Hope so.
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Baseball Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into the Atlanta Baseball Party, your home for the best Atlanta Braves baseball talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Jarvis Davis, Kris Willis, and Grant McCauley. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code all lowercase LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. And the Atlanta Baseball Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Braves got a big win in the original Brew City Tuesday, and there are some big takeaways from that W. We'll talk about that, and we'll download with Grant McCauley a little later. But first, let's be real about what we think of the Braves' moves at the trade deadline. So, Kris, Alex Anthopoulos filled arguably the biggest position of need for the Braves by bringing back Jorge Soler. But for you, could we see lightning strike twice with this reunion?
I mean, it'd be great if it did. I think, we all remember that 2021 season fondly.
Yeah.
Obviously, it doesn't always happen that way. But that was an instance where every move that he made pretty much worked out. And of course, the Braves ran all the way to the World Series. I think this one's a little different. It's going to be interesting. I think the biggest question I have in my mind is Soler has not played in the field defensively all season. So that's going to be a little bit of an adjustment. But, hey, again, this team struggled offensively. He's a big bat to add to the lineup. He's been playing well, got off to a little bit of a slow start, but he's been playing well, and this lineup needs some thump. And I think he's going to slot in at the leadoff spot, and it's going to be interesting to see if, they can start to build some momentum offensively.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point that you made, Kris, because you could kind of go back and forth, and many have, on exactly what the biggest need was. Was it for the outfield? Were there some concerns, especially when you had that collective gasp like Ronaldo Lopez over the weekend? But at least we got some good news in terms of that not being a major issue. So that could have kind of factored in. But I think at this point, if you look at it from the perspective of 2021, I was telling Jarvis, just a couple of days ago, until we have another sample size, Kris, until we have another example, that's the example that we go to look to and say, hey, Alex Anthopoulos worked miracles in 2021, and it actually paid big dividends. Now, like you said, we don't know that it's going to pay big dividends to the point where this franchise is walking away with another World Series. But for what you need to do to at least stay atop the wild card race in the National League, or to potentially make sure that you're not sliding, down the rankings, if you will, to ensure that you maybe host that wild card game. You just want to be in a position, or that wild card, you just want to be in a position to where you try to do whatever it is that you have to do to kind of piecemeal things together and give yourself an opportunity to make a run down the road. But the question, Jarvis, is once again, we want to see, as Kris said, lightning strike again. Could we see lightning strike again? Is it likely with this reunion?
To be honest with you, if you're just looking at the numbers, and you know me, T, I like to get like a feel for it, but baseball, you coming into the numbers, and when you look at the numbers, you talking about a 749 OPS with Jorge Soler, and that's a lot better than what we've been seeing specifically from that leadoff spot in the month of July, because going into Tuesday's game against the Brewers, Jared Kelenic was batting 125 with a 428 OPS. That's not good. And when you think about Alex being very vocal about, hey, he's going to slide into that leadoff spot in his press conference right after the trade deadline went down. So it's comforting to know that, hey, help is on the way. And then you're talking about a guy that went to the All-Star game last year with the Miami Marlins, and we know how woeful it is playing for them. 36 home runs. He's not, hitting the ball out of the park like that this year. I think he had like 12. He's sitting at like 12 home runs right now. So when you think about it just from a need standpoint, I'll say, okay, and from a number standpoint, and given what he's doing since June, he's starting to heat up a little bit. So you hopefully that transfers and carries over into this lineup and give this lineup some life, because Lord knows, like Kris said, these guys have been struggling, T.
Yeah, it's been tough for them. And of course, in that same deal, Kris, you get Luke Jackson. And so he's someone who obviously this franchise has fond memories of as well. What's the importance of bringing Luke Jackson back into this pitching staff to maybe bring some assistance to that bullpen?
I think it's an interesting fit. It's one of those situations where the bullpen didn't look like it really needed somebody, but this was a little bit of safeguarding, adding some depth, and giving yourself another option. I think Luke's kind of like Jorge Soler in a lot of ways, that he's been pitching his best ball lately. Yeah. And, he's another guy that can go multiple innings if they need him to, and just got that playoff experience. So it's going to be interesting to see who ends up being the odd man out down there. But, I mean, as we know, there's still 2 months to go. Yeah. Another injury could pop up. Anything could happen. And I think that was the main point of this move, was just adding another option to that bullpen.
You know what, Kris, it's funny, man, because I go back to that Dodger series, and I was just watching the pitching sequence from when Tyler Matzek, I was about to say God rest his soul, but he's not dead. He just don't play for the Braves anymore. I was like, I don't know why I had that thought. But anyway, I think about Luke Jackson, how frustrated he looked on the bench when Tyler Matzek was out there pitching, and just for Tyler to be able to come through like he did, going against Anthopoulos and Mookie Betts, it was just amazing, that moment. So I think that if Luke can put himself in a situation where you have to have some conversations about, okay, is AJ Minter struggling down the stretch, or as we get closer to playoffs, or Jimenez, or a guy like Bummer, can he replace Bummer? I know he's a lefty, but when it comes down to the playoffs, you like to know who's pitching their best and who's the guys going to be the most effective going into different situations or high leverage situations once the playoffs get rolling. So I feel like if Luke can be that guy to at least have to question one of your guys you have on your roster already, I feel like that'll be more than enough for me.
Yeah. And Kris, we know Alex Anthopoulos is a straight shooter. He said, quote, "We have 5 starters that we like." He said the Braves explored frontline starters, guys who could start in the postseason. So as always, looking ahead, but couldn't quite, quote, line up on value and cost. So given that a starter was maybe a position of need, as we mentioned a few moments ago, going into that trade deadline, are you okay with that quote from Anthopoulos? And more importantly, the approach or the mindset behind why they didn't necessarily pick up another starter?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've heard that quote a little bit. It restated a little differently before. I mean, the last trade deadline during the offseason, I think they're always looking for a frontline starter if they can get one, if you can line up. But I also think the good news on Reynaldo Lopez, it sounds like he could be back as early as this weekend. Even if they have to IL him, it doesn't sound like it's going to be a long wait to get him back. Max Fried trending in the right direction. I think if the story was different with those two guys, then I think they probably had approached the trade deadline a lot different because I think they would have had to have added at least a starter. So, I think, again, I think the thing about Alex Anthopoulos is they always explore all their options. They look at anything they can do to make the team better. A starter didn't line up this time. Maybe it does in the offseason. But, with what they have, if they can keep their guys healthy, and that's always the big question, if they can keep their guys healthy, I think it's a really strong group heading into the postseason.
Yeah, and I think one of the more difficult things, Jarvis, for fans at least, is when you look at how tight that race is in the wild card, and you look at the New York Mets in particular, like right there, just breathing down the necks of the Braves. And then you look at the San Diego Padres not far behind, and all of the moves that the Mets made with the 6 veterans that they were able to acquire ahead of the trade deadline, and the moves that the Padres were able to make where they traded for closers at the deadline before, Josh Hader, coming to mind. And then you think about the things that they've traded for even this time around. I think that's what kind of makes people like a little bit shell-shocked, except to Kris's point, if you look at the verbiage that AA mentioned in that presser, line up on value and cost, he didn't see a starter out there that lined up that way for what it is that the Braves were willing to do at this time. So that's why you hold.
Yeah, and I'm with him on that because when you think about the Braves didn't need a back end starter, right? Because we on Tuesday we saw Bryce Elder. He looked really good. I love the pacing in which he was pitching and all that stuff. I know we'll talk about that a little bit later, but and then you got Spencer Swellenbach. Like, are you
Yeah.
gonna trade for somebody on the back end and move your young pup down? I know you can probably go to a 6-man rotation, but you don't have to. You don't have to because given the way Swellenbach has been pitching. So and it's like Kris mentioned, Anthopoulos is always having those conversations, we talk about on this show all the time about him having foresight, especially when we talk about Max Fried potentially walking away. So yeah, if they can get a frontline starter with a couple of years of control, so be it. Let's have that conversation. Let's make it happen. So I think overall, when you look at the market and what teams were wanting, in return for those frontline starters, it's a reason why some of those deals broke down. I think Jack Flaherty is the only guy that you can look at and say, hey, he was a frontline starter and they got the deal done. And that's the Dodgers because they willing to do and pay whatever to get to be able to compete. So and that's just not how the Braves are run. So I'm fine with how things kind of played out yesterday.
Yeah, and the Padres, of course, acquired Martin Perez. But when you look down, really up and down the board across Major League Baseball, it just happened to be one of those quirky times where this was in favor of this market was in favor of the sellers, and there was just more supply than. And when I say demand, not so much more supply than demand, that the players that were needed by the respective teams weren't out there. Those teams just respectively weren't able or weren't willing to pay the cost, and that's understandable, especially in the case of the Braves. When we come back, we'll download with Grant McCauley and go in deep. This episode of our Atlanta Baseball Party is brought to you by PrizePicks. Now, PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll and get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community today. In fact, you can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. Turn $10 into 1,000. Get in on the excitement and win up to 100 times your cash with the summer games on PrizePicks. With PrizePicks, you could turn that money into big dollars while watching Team USA rack up the gold medals this summer, just like we saw as recently as last night with the U.S. women's gymnastics teams. You can make a PrizePicks lineup of players across gymnastics, basketball, soccer, and so much more. So download the PrizePicks app today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
Locked On Sports Today is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel and is programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is the Atlanta Baseball Party. I am joined by Grant McCauley, who is our Locked On Braves postcast co-host and makes an appearance on Locked On Braves. And of course, he's here with us as we go dig a little deep into the trade deadline. We talked about a little bit earlier as far as the Braves making a move. And Grant, I want to start here. I understand the nostalgia that comes with bringing in guys like Jorge Soler and Luke Jackson, but in 2024, does this move make sense for the Atlanta Braves?
I think it makes a ton of sense because Jorge Soler is the kind of hitter that they were looking for in a few different ways. Number one, he's a proven power hitter that they're familiar with. That certainly checks the box. That helps. But it's more than just a nostalgia tour, because if you go back and look at what he has done since the 1st of June, Jorge Soler has been putting together some very good numbers, on basing at about a 360 clip, batting 280, maybe not as many home runs as you're accustomed to seeing. And then recently he moved back into the leadoff spot for the San Francisco Giants, and he has been hitting extremely well there in 28 games. And he is also, here in the second half, apparently just hit the ground running. And that's not something that we're talking about enough for a lot of Braves hitters. So you wanted somebody that could come in and help out in a number of different ways to give you more thump, to give you somebody that's getting on base consistently, and perhaps to solve this leadoff spot. Because Brian Snitker said a few days ago, with Jarred Kelenic going through it the way that he has, and I know he's having a better night in Milwaukee on Tuesday, but with what Kelenic's gone through the last 3 or 4 weeks, thinking outside the box a little bit when it comes to leadoff. Well, thinking outside the box is exactly what Jorge Soler was synonymous with when they put him in the leadoff spot in 2021, and that worked out pretty well. So Alex Anthopoulos, thrilled to have him back, said that there weren't a lot of impact bats that they liked that were available, and Jorge Soler was at the top of their list. So excited to have him. Luke Jackson, you can just kind of strengthen, add somebody else to your bullpen mix. He's been pitching well over the last month. And these are two, again, players that they know. And from a long-term perspective, which maybe we can get into later, they weren't scared of the fact that Soler has 2 more years in his contract. They actually viewed that as a positive.
You know what? How soon do you think that Jorge Soler gets inserted into that leadoff spot?
Wednesday. That's going to be the deal. Brian Snitker's talked about it. Alex Anthopoulos said they had their flights delayed on Tuesday, but you want to bring somebody in and put them in that position where they can succeed. And Jorge Soler has succeeded in the leadoff spot for Atlanta, and the brief amount of times that he's been used there in his career, it just seems to click. It just seems to work. The interesting thing is not so much where he hits in the order as that he has been a DH all year long. And when he puts on his glove and trots out to what I assume will be right field, mostly, it's going to be the first time he's been in the field all year. But the Braves, they happen to have a DH that's been doing pretty well. So I don't think they're going to rock that boat.
Yeah, I don't see that happening at all because, like I said, Marcell Ozuna deserves all the benefit of the doubt. What did I just say that? Because he has carried this team for sure.
Anymore for him, so there's that.
No doubt about it. So I think that I do like the move. I do feel like this is. I talked about corner outfielder being one of those needs that because God bless him. Adam Duvall and Eddie Rosario, I just don't feel like that's the answer. You can't just keep running those guys out there like that. So hopefully Jorge Soler brings some stability to those spots. Now, another position that a lot of people thought, including myself, that they need to at least try to discover, right, or have conversations about was a starting pitcher. How close do you think they actually were to getting one, or do you feel like that markets were just too rich for Alex Anthopoulos to kind of dive into at this moment?
I think those markets were pretty crazy. When you look at the names that were actually dealt, I mean, there were no like front of the rotation, impact arms, like long-term plays that were out there. I mean, Garrett Crochet of the White Sox got a lot of discussion. Could he make sense at some point? Would that be an arm that would be, a nice fit for the Braves? Or probably 28 other teams if you discount the Chicago White Sox, who could keep him. But I have a feeling that he'll end up being traded. But putting that aside, a lot of rumor went around that, but there was no execution on it. And you saw a lot of 4th and 5th starters, guys who are coming off the IL or who've spent a lot of time on the injured list, and a group of pitchers that I thought, well, they might be 4th or 5th starters right now, but in a few weeks, they might be in danger of being DFA'd. They're kind of fringy starters. And Michael Lorenzen springs to mind in that regard with the Rangers. Who's to say he even would have had a spot there once they get guys like Jacob deGrom back? So putting all that aside and just kind of looking at the pitchers that were dealt, I don't really feel like, A, that the Braves missed out on much, and B, it pretty much confirms that the prices for the more elite starters, even for the teams that were clearly in sell mode, I don't think that the Braves wanted to play in that pool, if that makes sense. So I don't know that they had to have one, given that they got what sounds like good news about both Max Fried and Reynaldo Lopez, who had a clean MRI, as did Fried. Fried is now throwing bullpens. Both of those guys are lined up with a possibility of starting this weekend against the Marlins. We'll see if Fried comes off the injured list inside of the 15 days. That would be great. And we'll see if Lopez can make his next scheduled start. Those would be some pretty good developments. Then you can start thinking about some of the other depth you have, the A.J. Smith-Schaubers, the Bryce Elders, who was on the mound against Milwaukee on Tuesday. And, of course, Ian Anderson at some point can factor in all of this. So there is depth there, even if at times it hasn't really felt like it.
Yeah, and I think that, that depth is – I think the timing has been really good for the Braves as far as the pitching staff, right? Because we understand what all of the losses the Braves have had to take in that lineup. So I want to kind of ask you about Michael Harris, kind of like an update as far as where he is. How soon can we look to see? I know we got some good news about Ozzie Albies. I know you can kind of touch on that as well. But where is Michael Harris right now as far as when do you think we'll see him start to kind of get back to rolling and getting things going?
Michael's expectation is to come off the injured list when first eligible in the middle of August. So we're about 2 weeks away from him getting back. Alex Anthopoulos said on his press conference call on Tuesday evening that Ozzie Albies, as of right now, is tracking for an early September return. I would say early to mid-September, but that's an optimistic return from the latest of the broken bones that he has had to deal with over the past few years. You just kind of have to feel for Ozzie, but the fact is, this is a kid that seems to heal pretty quickly at times as well. So with Deadpool and Wolverine out, maybe that's kind of what Ozzie Albies is channeling, that healing factor to get back in there. But whatever the case, the Braves will be happy to have both those guys back in there. Then you start thinking about a lineup that's got a Jorge Soler coming over, who's hitting the ball very well. Austin Riley's been swinging it well. Matt Olson's been showing some signs. Travis d'Arnaud and Sean Murphy, I think, are also starting to show just a little bit. And then you look at that outfield mix and you start thinking, okay, well, we've got Jorge Soler there. You get Michael Harris back in. Then you can kind of pick the matchups that you like for Adam Duvall, for Jared Kelenic, for Eddie Rosario, and whoever's not in the lineup that day. You all of a sudden have a bench that's pretty threatening. So there are some things that have worked out here. That, of course, assumes, and Alex Anthopoulos stipulated that as well, that you assume health, which you know is not a sure thing. But as comprised, if they can get this group healthy down the stretch and into October, they do feel like they are in a better place.
Yeah, I can just feel Brian Snicker's pain just far as like, okay, who I'm gonna put in the lineup tonight?
Nope.
Man, I got this guy out. I got this guy out. It's just I can definitely assume that he's been pretty stressed this year, man.
Yeah, it's like managing a radio station on weekends. You know what I mean? Like you just can't get all the great talent to come in there, and everybody's got a reason maybe to not be in the lineup. I don't know if anybody out there is going to get that joke, but I know you and I do.
Yes, I am laughing tremendously within my soul right now. So yeah, I'm smiling for those listening on the audio side. But one more before we get out. Do you get concerned? Because I know Alex Anthopoulos in the press conference, he talked about staying away from that third tier apron. Can you kind of explain that, for some people who may not know what that is? I know basketball, NBA, they kind of talked about tiers and aprons and all that stuff. Can you kind of explain what Alex Anthopoulos was talking about when he said that they were kind of going to remain away from that or right before that?
The too long didn't read version of that is basically it's reported based on the numbers that are out there and available on a lot of sites that are really good roster resources where the Braves might have been in regards to the third tier of the luxury tax. Now, the Braves had never been in that pool at all. They had never had to pay the tax until last year. They were not going to shy away from it. Alex Anthopoulos said before the season, look, we're in a place where we intend to add payroll moving forward. So they're not trying to stay inside of a box that will not allow them to go over that. I think he was just clarifying that we haven't as of yet. And based on the money and the figures that they have in-house, which will always be a little bit more accurate than kind of trying to do the guesswork of, well, how much money came from this team? What were the cash considerations in this deal? Did something else get moved? I mean, a lot of that is just not made for public knowledge. It's just never put out there, but they're running their books and they know what they've got. So I think it just comes down to, for the right move, they will go over that. I think Alex Anthopoulos has said that. He's indicated that Terry McGurk, who's the guy that signs off on these things, is also backing him up on that. So that probably explains it about as well as I can without getting lost in the minutia of the different tiers and the levels of the luxury tax threshold, the competitive balance tax, which, I understand, I guess, why it's there, but, de-incentivizing spending, I'm sure that there's a contingent out there that would love to see those kind of things go away so that you don't have to worry about impacting your draft pool and other things that get involved in this. It gets very convoluted.
Yeah, man. I try to stay away from those. That's why I asked you to explain. Thank you, Grant. I really appreciate that.
Here for you.
We want to thank you guys for listening to the Atlanta Baseball Party. We're not done. Coming up next, it is The Stretch.
This episode of our Atlanta Baseball Party is brought to you by SupplyHouse. Get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trade, SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. So join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com/TM and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com. So Jarvis, the Braves got back into the win column. Always a beautiful thing when we can see the Braves not just win, but get a quality win against a quality team like they did against the Milwaukee Brewers 5-1. What was your biggest takeaway from that win?
I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. It has to be, for me, it has to be Bryce Elder and the way he pitched. And when you're talking about 7 strikeouts, I just felt like he just was pitching with confidence last night, and just way how he's working the hitters and just moving at a nice pace. Because sometimes when you find yourself getting into a trouble as a pitcher, you kind of start laboring a little bit, start wiping the brow, and start taking a little bit more time. And a lot of times when you talk about from a mental aspect and you get off rhythm, that's when big mistakes start to happen, or big innings start to kind of come up on your doorstep. So, and I didn't see that last night. I see that on Tuesday against the Milwaukee Brewers. So yeah, I think that's the big thing for me, as far as, okay, this is more confidence, this is more soothing, when it comes to that back end of that rotation. Like, okay, maybe Bryce Elder can be a spot starter, or continue with that 6-man rotation, so Chris Sale and Ronaldo Lopez can continue to get the extra rest that they deserve in their careers.
And Chris, it's one of those where quietly, after it felt like the sky was falling and the Braves dropped 6 in a row, they win 3 of their last 4 quality wins against the Mets, and now quality win against the Brewers to put themselves in position for a rubber match today, and maybe a series win. What did you like about what you saw in the win against the Brewers Tuesday?
I mean, just the way they bounced back. As you said, Bryce Elder needed a good start. He went out there and got it. I know the surface numbers have been ugly, but the peripheral numbers are starting to look not that bad. And guys like him and some of those other guys that are at AAA are going to be important down the line, down the final 2 months, because as Jarvis mentioned, they've got to continue to give Chris Sale, Reynaldo Lopez, even Max Fried, when he's back, extra time. Because, I mean, we've seen it in the last 2 postseasons. The Braves need those frontline guys to be rested, healthy, and pitching well if they get to the postseason. Because we've seen the results the last 2 seasons. I think that's the most important thing.
Indeed. And like you mentioned, it was nice to see Jarred Kelenic kind of break out of the slump. He hit the home run, he hit the double, but also, and of course, we never like it when there are men left on base. That's always the thing that makes us cringe. So 11 men left on base, not so much of a good thing. But ultimately, when you see Austin Riley go 4 for 5, I think that's another thing that makes you feel encouraged, because again, not that we're not concerned, as you mentioned, Chris, when there's an issue like with Ronaldo Lopez, or when Max Fried goes on the IL, or anyone from that pitching rotation has a little bit of a hiccup. But they've been the steadiest of steady this entire season, so that we're always looking to see what are the bats going to do. And this is maybe not statistically something, but for me, another thing was, okay, well, you get Jorge Soler, you get Luke Jackson. Those are small moves, but moves nonetheless. And then your bats start to wake up a little bit in spaces and places where you need them to. And then ultimately you stack that with the fact that Bryce Elder had a nice outing. I kind of like the symmetry of it all at the trade deadline to say, yeah, maybe this is not the Braves going for it per se, the way you saw in 2021 around the trade deadline. But I think a lot of this still gives you some encouragement about what the rest of this season can look like heading into the postseason.
Yeah, and can I throw in Orlando Arcia as well? He's on a 10-game hitting streak. Good Lord, no. Everybody would start looking at him like, all right, man, I know he's a great defender, but good Lord, he's been a hole in the lineup, for the past couple months. But for him to kind of start picking it up, and ironically enough, he homered against his former team as well. So when you see him shining against his former team, that's how there's some motivation behind it, right? So hopefully he can continue on that tear that he's been on for these past 10 games.
Yeah, getting a little revenge. It's always served up sweet. And also AJ Minter, Joe Jimenez, and Raisel Iglesias pitching a combined 2 2/3 innings of shutout relief is also a good look there as well. And Jarvis, we talked about the fact that, and you and Grant talked about Ronaldo Lopez, Max Fried potentially getting a start this weekend. Kris mentioned it earlier as well. So again, maybe smaller moves than we'd anticipated or maybe even hoped for at the trade deadline. But you can kind of say those were some moves, maybe not official moves of the trade deadline, but maybe knowing that they are on their way back on the mend, maybe were the things that impacted how movement was or wasn't made at the trade deadline for Alex Anthopoulos and these Braves.
You go, Chris. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, especially with I think especially with Max Fried. I mean, you could go out and trade for a starter, but I mean, you're not gonna replace a Max Fried. That's just the way it is. And I mean, same thing if Chris Sale gets hurt, you're not going to go out and get a replacement for that type of guy. So, I don't like to use that comparison to the trade deadline when you get guys back. But I mean, there is some validity to it. And I mean, Michael Harris down the road, hopefully next month too. Those are quality players that you're just not going to go out and replace very often. So, I think at this point, it's the time of the year they need everything to start gelling. And, you start getting these guys back from injury, and I think that you got a real opportunity there.
Yeah.
I think the timing is amazing. I don't know if Alex Anthopoulos plans it. Sometimes I feel like I give him a lot of credit, and I don't know if I can give him credit for, hey, man, everybody's healthy at the same time. Okay. My two of my top three starters are okay now. They can potentially get a start this weekend. So, but I feel like this is something that I have to remain optimistic about the Braves. That it's just in me because of I trust Alex Anthopoulos. Like, not to say that he can't do no wrong, but like when it comes to Atlanta professional sports pantheon, Chris, Alex Anthopoulos is at the top of the list, and it's everybody else. So when these times come about, and when you have situations or scenarios play out like they did with Reynaldo Lopez being cleared and being okay, and Max Fried potentially coming back, and both of those guys being looked at for this weekend to potentially get a start against the Marlins, I feel like this is something that's coming together. And you combine that with Jorge Soler being popped in at the top of the lineup. Now, I'm not sure where Jared Kelenic would fit in that line. I know he's going to be somewhere, but I'm not quite sure where Snit may put him in that lineup. I'll be interested to see where he falls. So, but I think that, it's a type of situation that you have to deal with because you know what you're going to get. And so Jorge Soler slapping him at the top of the lineup. So I'm encouraged, and hopefully they can use this game against the Brewers and this getaway game as momentum going into a division opponent, and we know how important those are going forward down the stretch.
Definitely, with the Braves and the Mets all knotted up at 57, Padres right behind them at 56 wins in that race for the wild card spot. And I think that we kind of like, if you dig into the numbers a little bit as well, of course, the Braves are big bats, so it's always exciting when we see them have home runs, but there was also a nice sequence there where they got 4 straight hits against Ross as Nacho Alvarez single, Kelenic doubled, Riley, Ozuna delivered singles. Those are the types of things that, while it's not necessarily home run after home run, long ball after long ball, it still shows a little bit of a consistency there that we need to see. And also, like you guys mentioned, Max Fried being able to throw a bullpen session Monday, scheduled to throw another one today. I think that's really good in terms of him dealing with the left forearm neuritis that has had him out since July 16th. So hopefully these are the types of things that slowly but surely get the Braves back into form, up and down the lineup, up and down the rotation, that give us some encouragement for what it's going to look like for the rest of the season. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Baseball Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Braves for your second listen, and be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're free and available wherever you download your podcast, and we'll see you on the Atlanta Sports Party Thursday.